Welcome back to the deep dive. Our mission here is, well, to crack open complex sources, to really distill the crucial knowledge that often gets kind of buried beneath all the footnotes.
hmm
Today, we're starting something big. It's a multi-part journey into one of the most foundational texts in modern economic thought. I'd even say maybe one of the most explosive.
Yeah, definitely foundational. We're talking about Joseph A. Schumpeter's The Theory of Economic Development.
Exactly. And we're kicking off this deep dive, not exactly with the theory itself right away, but with the context, the intellectual vision behind it.
That's right. We're focusing squarely on the 1934 English edition. It's such a pivotal moment because that's when Schumpeter really cemented his dynamic, evolutionary view of capitalism for the English-speaking world.
And for you listening, getting this context, the backstory, the trauma, the ambition, his whole methodological approach, it's really essential. It's key to grasping the huge idea this book introduced, creative destruction.
Absolutely. You can't understand the storm without knowing the climate it formed in.
So that 1934 milestone, it's critical. The book originally came out in German, right? Back in 1911. Theorie der wirtschaftlichen Entwicklung.
Yes, 1911.
But this English version, landing smack in the middle of the Great Depression, it had this very specific subtitle, An Inquiry into Profits, Capital, Credit, Interest, and the Business Cycle.
And that subtitle is doing a lot of work there. It's like a scholarly gauntlet thrown down. He's basically announcing, look, I'm going to explain the whole machinery of boom and bust. It's incredibly ambitious.
It really signals the scope.
And it's a key moment for how ideas travel, intellectual transmission. The fact that he'd already revised the German versions twice, in 1926 and 1931, tells you his thinking wasn't static either. It was evolving.
Right.
But what's really fascinating, and McCraw's biography really brings this out, is that Schumpeter specifically chose this book, The Theory of Economic Development, to revisit so thoroughly. It's the only one of his major works he spent that much energy on, remeditating, revising, condensing the ideas for the English audience.
Why, though? Why this one specifically?
Because he saw it as the bedrock. It was the essential theoretical foundation. He couldn't really build the arguments in his later giants like Business Cycles in 39 or Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy in 42 without first laying this groundwork. This was step one.
Okay, so it sets the stage for everything that follows. Makes sense. So before we dive into that creative chaos he talks about, let's unpack the world that shaped him, the crucible, if you will.
Definitely.
Yeah.
We have to start with his formative years. He was born in 1883, so his life literally spanned this incredible period of transformation. The Austro-Hungarian Empire collapsing,
Wow.
the whole social and economic fabric changing. It was like a living laboratory for watching the kind of rapid, disruptive change that became the heart of his theory.
You mentioned this collision of orders, and there's that great anecdote about his family, right? His ancestors lived in this tiny town, Triche, for like 400 years.
400 years, can you imagine? Deep, static tradition.
Exactly. But Schumpeter himself, totally different story. Huge geographical and social mobility just within his own lifetime.
Totally. His mother, who sounds like she had serious entrepreneurial drive herself, moved him first to Graz, then to Vienna, the big cosmopolitan center. She was actively seeking, high social advantage for him.
So he's experiencing both worlds at once.
Simultaneously, he's steeped in the rigid formalities, the aristocracy of the Habsburg era, that's the sort of medieval order. But at the same time, he's witnessing the incredible speed of modern capitalism transforming everything around him. It was a head-on collision of worlds right there in his own life.
It makes you wonder, how could someone living through that believe in those static economic models?
Yeah.
The ones where everything just repeats.
Precisely. If your reality is defined by constant upheaval, the idea of an economy just ticking along in equilibrium must seem, incomplete, absurd even.
Yeah.
And that direct, almost visceral observation of rapid systemic change, that's what forms the basis of his later concept of vision.
Okay, let's talk about vision. What did he mean by that exactly?
Schumpeter argued that any truly great economist needs this vision. It's a pre-analytic cognitive act. It's like a fundamental intuition about how the world actually works before you even start crunching numbers or building formal models.
That's the starting point.
It's the absolute starting point. And his vision, shaped by that Habsburg tumult, was fundamentally dynamic. It was about an evolving process, not a static state of balance.
Why did he put so much weight on this intuition over, say, just looking at the data or pure logic?
Well, he thought that without a strong, coherent vision, an economist could easily get lost. You could get trapped in ideology or just drown in data without seeing the bigger picture. The vision determines what questions you ask, what facts you even look for, what you ultimately see as important.
Okay.
And for Schumpeter, who had this maybe slightly romantic ambition of creating an exact economy, like physics,
Right, you mentioned that.
the vision had to be strong enough, robust enough, to handle the sheer complexity and messiness of the real world. And his early life, seeing how fragile order could be, how quickly things change, that gave him a very robust, dynamic vision. He realized you only really see how economic mechanisms work when things are changing fast.
And seeing that fragility, that need for change, that led him to focus on the political side too, right? The conditions needed to manage that change.
Absolutely crucial. He wasn't an anarchist celebrating chaos. He put tremendous importance on political order. He believed capitalist progress wasn't automatic. It needed pretty rigid conditions to keep the economic dynamism from just tearing society apart.
Like what kind of conditions?
Things like the rule of law, certainty about private property rights, and crucially, supervision by an independent administration. A stable political framework.
Which brings us back to Emperor Franz Joseph. He seems like an odd figure in this context.
He does, doesn't he? But Franz Joseph reigned for 68 years. 68. That provided this almost unnatural level of symbolic stability, of political legitimacy.
Even though he wasn't interested in the economic changes himself. The trains, the phones.
Famously uninterested. He reportedly refused to have a telephone or electric lights in his personal residence.
Yeah.
But his long, stable reign created the container, the framework, that Schumpeter felt was essential. It allowed the engine of capitalism, which requires volatility and destruction, to run without completely shattering the social order.
Wow. That's a really powerful paradox. Economic dynamism needs social stability.
That's the fundamental Schumpeterian tension right there.
So the intellectual stage was set by this background, this tension, but then the 1920s brought huge personal challenges that must have shaped the man writing the 1934 edition.
Oh, profoundly.
Yeah.
The emotional backdrop is just vital to understand. The late 1920s were absolutely devastating for him personally.
What happened?
He lost his second wife, Annie. She died tragically during childbirth in 1926. He adored her. He wrote that she taught him it was possible to live a paradise on earth, and her death just extinguished the light for him for a long time.
That's terrible.
It really was. And that deep trauma definitely affected his outlook. It contributed, in part, to the search he undertook for a new scientific home, as he put it.
A scientific home, meaning he was trying to redefine his academic focus.
Exactly. He started trying to merge economic theory more explicitly with broader social theory. That's where the German term socioeconomy comes in.
Which isn't just economic sociology, is it?
No, it's richer than that. It reflects this real determination to treat economic life as fundamentally intertwined with social institutions, historical forces, culture, politics. It was a conscious pushback against the trend towards increasingly narrow, purely mathematical economics that was starting to take hold.
So he's broadening his scope.
Yes. He realized you couldn't understand economic development without understanding the institutional context, the legal rules, the cultural norms, the financial system. These weren't external factors. They were part of the engine itself.
And this intellectual shift happened around the same time he was facing career roadblocks in Austria.
Yeah, the timing coincided. Apparently his path in Vienna was blocked by an old rival, some high-ranking official whose promotion Schumpeter had opposed years before. Petty academic politics, maybe, but it mattered.
Wow.
So combine the personal trauma with the professional frustration, and the move to the U.S., specifically to Harvard in 1932, starts to make a lot of sense. It was a huge moment, both for him and for American economics.
And he wasn't exactly arriving as an unknown quantity, was he? Even in the middle of the Depression?
Oh, not at all. He was a genuine academic star. He'd actually lectured at Harvard 2 decades earlier, and crucially, he'd formed this really close, deep friendship with Frank Taussig.
Taussig. He was the big name in the department then.
Yeah, the longtime leader. Schumpeter affectionately called him Pa. So he had connections and immense respect already. The Harvard department recognized his unique intellectual firepower immediately.
And they paid him accordingly, I read.
They certainly did. By 1935, he was the highest paid professor in the economics department, $12,000 a year, which was serious money then. And he kept that salary for decades. They valued not just his specific theories, but his broad, interdisciplinary perspective.
Yet even with that status, that success, there was this internal contradiction in his intellectual drive, wasn't there? This dream of an exact economy, like physics.
This ambition to somehow reconcile these highly abstract mathematical models with the full, messy totality of historical and sociological reality. McCraw calls it an essentially romantic mission.
Romantic meaning maybe impossible.
Likely unattainable for anyone, yeah. But it shows the depth of his scientific commitment. He was genuinely chasing mathematical precision, that predictive power, but at the same time, he completely recognized how uncertain, how psychological, how deeply historical economic behavior actually is.
So you've got this mathematical genius who knows humans are unpredictable, yet he's trying to model them perfectly. That's quite a tightrope walk.
It's a tension that runs through everything. And it really defines his methodological approach, which is what we should probably turn to next, looking at the preface to the 1934 edition.
Okay, so let's get into the 1934 English edition itself. You mentioned he'd revised the German versions multiple times.
Right, 1926, 1931.
Yet for this big international launch, he basically publishes the original 1911 work, just tidied up a bit. He chose to leave it, in his words, undisturbed. That seems odd. Almost defensive, maybe? Like he's freezing his younger self in time, even though his own thinking had moved on?
It does seem odd at first glance, but I think it was more strategic than defensive.
How so?
Remember, he saw the theory as the foundation. He realized he couldn't effectively present his more developed, much more complex ideas about the different layers of the business cycle, for instance, or the institutional critique in capitalism, socialism, and democracy until the reader had first grasped the original core mechanism.
The pure theory.
The pure theory of development. The role of the entrepreneur, the crucial function of credit, that baseline idea of the circular flow. He needed to establish point A clearly before he could lead people to the more complex points B and C. It was about building the argument logically.
Okay, that makes sense. Laying the groundwork first.
Yeah.
And this decision also reflects how his own methods were changing, right? By the 30s, he wasn't just a pure theorist anymore. His time in business and politics.
Absolutely. His experiences, especially in government, in post-WWI Austria, had really pushed him beyond abstract theory alone. His mature methodological view really insists on bringing in empirical reality, but not just collecting facts.
What's the distinction?
He drew this really important line. He said the mere recognition of a historical fact doesn't mean much scientifically. The fact has to serve for theoretical work. Theory needs to digest the facts, make sense of them, otherwise they're just anecdotes.
But the big shift, the thing that really stands out later, is how much importance he placed on history. He put it right at the top.
Yes. In his later writings, when he lays out his credo, he talks about the three essential tools for an economist: theory, statistics, and history. And then he explicitly says history is by far the most important.
Wow. Coming from someone trained so rigorously in mathematical economics, that's a huge statement.
It really is. It shows how far his thinking had evolved.
Why did he think history was so important? What were his reasons for elevating it even above theory?
He gave three main reasons. First, he argued that the actual subject matter of economics capitalism primarily is an essentially unique process unfolding in historical time.
Meaning it's not timeless.
Exactly. You can't understand today's economic phenomena or any past eras without deep historical knowledge. You need what he called a historical sense. Economic systems aren't like physics laws. They are products of specific times and places.
So things like modern finance or global supply chains, you can't just apply a generic theory. You need the history.
You need the history of how they came to be. His second reason was about connection. He said historical analysis can't just be about economics. It inevitably has to include non-economic institutional facts, politics, law, social structures. And since those institutions are crucial for economic outcomes, studying history forces economists to connect economic facts with non-economic ones. It's the best way, he thought, to see how all the social sciences fit together.
Ah, so that links back to his idea of socioeconomy, using history as the bridge.
Precisely. And his third reason was maybe the most direct critique of the economics of his day. He argued that most fundamental errors in economic analysis don't come from faulty logic or bad math, as often as they come from a simple lack of historical experience.
Ouch, that's quite a charge. He's saying economists are getting it wrong because they don't know enough history.
It's a powerful claim. He was directly challenging the idea that just mastering abstract models was enough to understand economic reality. He thought historical depth was essential to avoid major conceptual mistakes.
How did this combined approach, rigorous theory plus deep history, go over with his colleagues, especially at a place like Harvard?
Well, it often led to a bit of confusion, partly because Schumpeter himself cultivated this rather distinctive, almost detached persona.
How so?
He was fiercely committed to value-neutral analysis. He constantly warned against mixing your political beliefs or moral judgments with scientific work. And this commitment, maybe strengthened by his early legal training, meant he got really good at arguing both sides of almost any issue.
Sounds like he enjoyed playing devil's advocate, maybe a bit contrarian.
Oh, definitely. His students often said it was impossible to figure out where he actually stood on controversial topics. He loved the intellectual sparring. George Stigler later wrote that Schumpeter had this detachment that was practically of another world when it came to theories and policies.
But being that independent, that neutral, that must have had a personal cost, right? Especially during really turbulent times like the 30s and 40s.
It absolutely did, particularly during World War II. His refusal to fully jump onto the bandwagon, to pick a side with passionate conviction, was often misunderstood.
How was it misunderstood?
Some colleagues saw it as just a passion for contradiction or maybe intellectual arrogance. They felt he lacked ardor intellectual,
Yeah.
you know, passionate commitment in department meetings. He actually wrote in his diary about feeling so much in disagreement with my environment because he couldn't confidently predict how long things like Bolshevism or Hitlerism would last.
So refusing to make those confident political predictions led to isolation.
A profound sense of isolation, yeah. Especially during his Harvard years. Here's the man theorizing disruption and change on this grand scale, but he often felt quite alone within the very society he was trying to explain.
That's a really deep tension. The brilliant analyst of change feeling detached from the human passions driving it.
It is. And it's out of that complex mix, the rigorous theory, the historical depth, and that intellectual detachment that he built, the architecture of the book we're discussing, the theory of economic development.
Okay, let's finally get to the structure of the 1934 book itself. His big goal, as we've said, is to explain the dynamic, evolutionary heart of capitalism, setting it against those older, static models. How does he actually build that argument across the 6 chapters?
Well, he starts very methodically. He knows he can't really talk about development until he clearly defines what the world looks like without development. So that's chapter 1, the circular flow.
The static economy.
Yeah.
What exactly is this circular flow for him?
Think of it as a theoretical construct in an idealized state of perfect equilibrium.
Okay.
In the circular flow, everything just repeats. Production, consumption, distribution, it's the same pattern, year after year after year. There's absolutely no innovation, no structural change, therefore no economic development in his sense of the word.
So economic life is just a loop.
Exactly, like the planet's rotating,
Yeah.
predictable, unchanging. Every firm knows its costs and revenues. Every consumer repeats their choices. Every resource stays in its place. It's the necessary baseline.
And you mentioned there's a subtle point he makes about costs, even within this static picture.
Yes, and this is a really crucial detail. Easy to miss, but important for his method. Even in the static circular flow, he acknowledges that costs can rise. But, and this is key, he carefully distinguishes this from the classical economists' concerns about rising costs.
How is it different?
He says, imagine an entrepreneur does manage to introduce something new, even though that technically breaks the circular flow. He uses it as a slight hypothetical here. The initial demand for the inputs needed labor, materials will bid up their prices. Then, as other people see the success and try to imitate it, jumping on what he calls the secondary waves, their demand pushes those input prices up even further.
Okay, so it's a cost increase driven by the activity within the system, using existing resources more intensely for a bit. It's not about running out of resources overall.
Exactly. It's temporary. It's about resource allocation dynamics within the system. He was super careful to draw a line between this and the Malthusian or Ricardian idea of secular long-term rising costs.
Why was that distinction so important to him?
Because the classical guys, Malthus, Ricardo, they were really focused on these perceived external limits population, outstripping food supply, running out of good land, leading to diminishing returns and eventual stagnation. Schumpeter wanted none of that. He explicitly says his cost mechanism has nothing to do with that classical assumption.
He's shifting the focus.
Completely. He's shifting the focus away from external nature-imposed limits to the internal dynamics of the capitalist system itself, driven by human action and choices. The temporary cost bumps are part of that internal process, not some unavoidable fate.
Okay, so chapter 1 builds this picture of perfect, boring stability. Then chapter 2 comes along and just smashes it. Innovation and the entrepreneur.
That's exactly it. Chapter 2 introduces the engine of change, the force that shatters the static equilibrium. This is where he argues that the very essence of capitalism is constant change, constant innovation. It makes the whole idea of a stable capitalist equilibrium fundamentally misleading.
Innovation is the core.
It's the core mechanism. It's what constantly throws the system into a state of tumult. He famously called it an eternal gale, but it's also what propels the economy forward.
Now, when he says innovation, he doesn't just mean inventing something new, right? There's a difference.
Crucial difference, yes. Invention is just coming up with a new idea, maybe drawing up blueprints for a better mousetrap. Innovation, for Schumpeter, is the economic implementation of that invention. It's successfully bringing that new mousetrap to market, changing production processes, making it part of economic life.
So it's about doing, not just thinking.
Precisely. The economic event is the adoption, the realization in practice.
What kinds of things count as innovation? It's broader than just new products, isn't it?
Oh yeah, much broader. It could be introducing a new good people haven't seen before, or a new method of production, maybe making an old good cheaper, opening up a completely new market, finding and securing a new source of raw materials or intermediate goods, or, importantly, creating new organizational structures.
Like mergers or monopolies.
Exactly. Things like forming a trust, breaking up a monopoly, reorganizing an industry. Those are all acts of innovation in his book. And all these require his key figure, the hombres nuevos, the emprendedores, the new men, the entrepreneurs. They are the driving force.
And these entrepreneurs, they're not just managers. They face huge pushback, don't they? Because innovation upsets the apple cart.
Massively. He talks about 3 big layers of resistance they have to overcome. First, there's pushback from groups who are threatened by the innovation. Think artisans whose skills become obsolete, workers displaced by new machines, firms whose products are subtly outdated. They fight it.
Makes sense. What's the second layer?
Second is the internal difficulty of just getting the new thing done. It requires convincing people, workers, suppliers, managers, to abandon familiar routines and adopt radical, often untested methods. That takes extraordinary leadership and persuasion.
Okay, so external resistance, internal implementation challenges. What's the third?
The third is conquering the consumer. You might have a brilliant new product, but if people are used to the old way, you have to actively change their habits, their tastes. You have to convince them to try something new.
Right.
Overcoming all 3, the social resistance, the operational difficulties, and the market inertia, requires what Schumpeter called a special aptitude. It's not just intelligence, it's willpower, conviction, nerve, leadership. It's far beyond the routine management needed in the circular flow. That's why the entrepreneur is kind of a heroic figure for him.
Okay, so that's the engine. Innovation driven by these heroic entrepreneurs overcoming resistance. Now, chapters 3 through 6 get into the consequences, right? The financial side, the distribution, fulfilling that subtitle promise.
Exactly. And chapter 3 dives right into the financial heart of it with a critical distinction. The difference between capital and credit.
What's the difference in his view?
Traditional capital, for Schumpeter, is just wealth that's already been accumulated, saved up from past activity. And it's used reproductively, meaning it's used to finance the ongoing, repeating activities of the circular flow. It's existing wealth funding existing processes.
Okay, so that funds the static system. But development, innovation, doing something new that needs something else, especially if its success is, as you said, completely uncertain.
Precisely. Dynamic capitalism, the system of change, relies overwhelmingly on credit. And Schumpeter defines credit very specifically. It's purchasing power, essentially money, that has not yet been accumulated. It's created, typically by banks, based purely on the expectation of future success.
Created out of thin air.
Pretty much, yes.
Oh.
Ex nihilo, as he puts it. Based on a bet on the future, this reliance on future expectations is what makes the whole capitalist system fundamentally future-oriented, dynamic, and inherently risky. Credit bridges the gap between today's resources and tomorrow's uncertain possibilities.
So the banks aren't just lending out existing savings. They're actually creating new money to fund the entrepreneur.
That's his crucial point. This credit isn't simply transferring existing savings from one person to another. It represents new purchasing power injected into the economy. It allows the entrepreneur to pull resources, land, labor, materials away from their established uses in the circular flow and redirect them towards completely new, untested ventures.
Wow, that makes the banking system sound incredibly powerful.
He called it the headquarters of the capitalist system, the central nerve. Because banks, by granting or withholding credit, effectively decide which potential innovations get a chance to become reality. They are the gatekeepers of development.
Okay, so if the entrepreneur is taking these huge risks, battling resistance, and the credit system is funding it based on uncertain future hopes, the potential reward must be massive, right? Which brings us to profit and interest in chapters 4 and 5.
Absolutely. Schumpeter was an unapologetic defender of high entrepreneurial returns, what he specifically defines as profit. He saw profit not as payment for managing capital or risk in the ordinary sense, but as a temporary surplus, a unique gain that comes only from successfully carrying out a new combination, an innovation.
Temporary.
Temporary, because once the innovation succeeds and others imitate it, competition drives prices down, costs potentially rise, and that special entrepreneurial profit disappears. The innovation becomes part of the new routine, the new circular flow until the next wave hits.
Given he was writing the English edition in the 1930s, with the Depression raging and huge debates about inequality and the need for redistribution,
Hmm.
how did he justify these potentially enormous profits going to a few individuals?
He justified them on essentially utilitarian, systemic grounds. He drew a very sharp line between the individual gain, the profit, and the collective benefit to society. His argument was stark. Yes, the rewards are high, maybe even extremely high, but that insatiable pursuit of success is precisely the engine that drives the whole system forward.
So the high profits are necessary bait.
Necessary bait, necessary motivation. He argued these high returns are essential, not just for the entrepreneur's pocket, but for generating massive social benefits, new jobs, entirely new industries, and crucially, higher general living standards for everyone through access to cheaper, better, new goods and services.
He had that famous line comparing the cost of failure to the benefit for the masses.
Right. He argued that even if an innovation causes disruption, say one entrepreneur goes bankrupt, or 1,000 artisans lose their jobs, that cost is relatively small compared to the vast increase in freedom and comfort afforded to millions of people by the resulting new affordable products. Think about mass-produced clothing, cars, appliances.
And he directly addressed the idea of taxing those fortunes away, didn't he?
He did. He made this provocative calculation, arguing that if you took all the wealth from the richest people in a country like Britain and just divided it up amongst everyone else, the amount each person would get would be tiny, infinitesimal, and wouldn't really change their long-term living standards much.
Right.
But, he argued, in the process of taxing away those fortunes, you destroy the primary incentive for taking the huge risks involved in innovation. You'd kill the goose that lays the golden eggs, essentially. So for him, the focus should always be on making the overall economic pie bigger through innovation, not primarily on how the existing pie is sliced.
That viewpoint, the trade-off between incentives and redistribution, is still right at the heart of economic debates today, isn't it? Tax policy, inequality.
Absolutely central. His arguments, right or wrong, continue to frame those discussions.
Okay, so we have innovation, credit fueling it, profit motivating it. That brings us finally to Chapter 6, the business cycle. How does this innovation process explain the booms and busts?
The cycle is baked right into the process itself. It's endogenous, meaning it comes from within the system, not from external shocks. The key is that innovation doesn't happen smoothly and continuously.
It comes in waves.
Exactly. It tends to arrive in clusters or groups. One entrepreneur makes a breakthrough with a major innovation. Think railroads or electricity or the internet. Then, once its success becomes clear, a swarm of other entrepreneurs follows, imitating and applying the core innovation in various ways.
So you get a rush of activity.
You get a boom, a period of intense investment, credit expansion, rising prices, and rapid structural change, all centered around this cluster of innovations.
And the bust follows inevitably.
In Schumpeter's view, yes. The boom phase often involves overinvestment, excessive credit creation, and speculation. Eventually, the initial innovative opportunities get exhausted, the credit bubble might pop, and investments turn out to be unprofitable. The bust, or depression, is then the necessary painful process of the economy adapting to the changes the boom brought about.
So the downturn is like the system cleaning house.
That's a good way to put it. It's absorbing the structural shifts, liquidating the bad investments and obsolete capital from the previous waves, and sort of resetting the stage for the next wave of innovation. It's inherently cyclical, inherently turbulent.
And this whole framework in the 1934 book laid the groundwork for his later massive study on business cycles.
Absolutely. The theoretical architecture is all here in the Theory of Economic Development. His huge 1939 book, Business Cycles, is essentially the application of this theory to centuries of economic history, where he meticulously traced these innovation waves, focusing on key industries like textiles, railways, steel, automobiles, electric power, and linking them to institutional changes like the rise of the factory, big corporations, and modern finance. The cycle is intrinsic to development.
Looking back at this 1934 book now, it feels incredibly prescient. He really did set the terms for so many debates we're still having in economics and, frankly, in political theory, too.
He really did. His work, for instance, profoundly anticipated the kind of economy that emerged after World War II, the mixed economy.
How so? Even though he was skeptical about it lasting.
Yeah, he personally struggled to imagine a stable, long-term compromise between pure laissez-faire capitalism and pure state socialism. He tended to think systems would inevitably swing towards one extreme or the other. But paradoxically, his theory provided the intellectual justification for the mixed economy.
By emphasizing the private engine.
By emphasizing the absolute necessity of the private entrepreneurial engine, driven by innovation and profit, even within a system that also had significant public responsibility and social regulation. His work showed why you needed to keep that dynamic core alive.
And his arguments about high rewards for entrepreneurs, they echo constantly today, don't they?
Constantly. Whenever there's debate about taxing billionaires or funding startups or the role of figures like Gates or Musk or Jobs, Schumpeter's core idea is right there. Is the prospect of immense success and reward necessary to motivate people to take the huge risks required for breakthrough innovation?
The motivation question, it never goes away.
It really doesn't. And beyond the content, his method also proved incredibly influential, even if it took a while for the mainstream to fully catch on.
You mean his insistence on history and institutions?
Exactly. His push to integrate history, sociology, and institutional analysis into rigorous economic theory, that was groundbreaking. It moved beyond just static models.
And that paved the way for whole new fields of study.
Absolutely. Fields like economic sociology, modern business history, evolutionary economics, they all owe a significant debt to Schumpeter. He forced economists eventually to grapple with the idea that economic life isn't just abstract forces, but a unique process unfolding in real historical time, shaped by messy human institutions. He was this theorist striving for purity who ended up championing a fundamentally interdisciplinary, historically grounded approach.
So as we wrap up this first deep dive, we're left with that central Schumpeterian tension, aren't we?
Right.
The lifelong quest for an exact, predictable economic science, running right up against his own description of capitalism as this chaotic, unpredictable, eternal gale of creative destruction.
It's a fascinating paradox. This vision of capitalism as a relentless, world-making storm.
Yeah.
And it leaves us, especially when we're digging into these sources, with a really profound question to reflect on. What does it actually mean to theorize capitalism from within it?
How do you mean?
Well, Schumpeter himself was deeply affected by the social destruction and reinvention he wrote about. He lived through the collapse of empires, personal tragedy, world wars. He was scarred by the instability. Yet at the same time, he became the ultimate champion of the economic engine driving that instability, describing its violent, unpredictable force almost admiringly. He saw the necessity, maybe even the beauty, in the turmoil.
An innovator analyzing innovation, both in his life and his ideas. Well, thank you for guiding us through this essential context, the vision, the history, the structure behind that crucial 1934 publication.
It's really the only place to start understanding Schumpeter. You need the setup.
Absolutely. So next time we finally step inside the book itself, we'll enter the world of Chapter 1 of the Theory of Economic Development and dive deep into the mechanism of the circular flow.
The static world.
The static world. We're going to rigorously explore that baseline Schumpeter built what economic life looks like when it's perfectly predictable, perfectly repetitive before the entrepreneurs arrive to unleash the chaos of development.
Sounds good. Looking forward to the calm before the creative storm.
Me too. See you next time for more of the Deep Dive.